And welcome, brothers, sisters, working class heroes. This is The Rick Smith Show. Thanks so much for being here today on the big program. Lots to get to, lots to talk about. Hope you bought your toilet paper early. Hope you got the stock of TP, because the first headline I came across today was, well, empty shelves, empty shelves. Toilet paper limits, empty shelves are back as virus surges. So hope you stocked up. Hope you made alternative plans. One of those things I was saying over the summer, another spike is coming, and we've had a dear leader who's done nothing. And I know, Rick, what happened? It was going to go away after the election. What happened the day after? We're never going to hear about the coronavirus again. Wasn't that what conservatives were telling us? Wasn't that what the right was telling us? Wasn't that what Rand Paul and his ilk were running around, and Trump were saying, we're no more shutdowns. We're not going to do any of that stuff. We're going to power right through it. And yet, here we are in this moment where you've now got a bunch of Republican states doing mask mandates, doing shutdowns. Mardi Gras has been canceled. Stop, let that sink in. This is what I tell my kids. Things are serious. When I started taking this really serious, now from the beginning I took it kind of serious, because hey, I don't want to get sick. Stay away from people. Don't have anybody sneeze on you. Stuff like that. Be cautious. But the second the NFL said, we're not going to play anymore. As soon as the NBA at halftime went home, that's the moment I started going, wait a second, when the multi-billion-dollar industries are going, we're shutting down, that was the moment to kind of take it seriously. That was the moment to not listen to the guy who failed high school biology. And here we are in this moment after listening to the guys who, clearly, are leading epidemiologists on the front lines of the MAGA rallies, with their flag underwear and those idiot red hats, have led us into this moment. So now like I said, Mardi Gras is canceled. You've got Republican states who are doing mask mandates. Mike DeWine in Ohio, they're going to a 21-day curfew starting, I guess, Thursday, because the numbers just keeping up. Remember, hoax. It was a hoax, big hoax. Just going to go away after the election. On Saturday, had 193,000 new cases across the country. On Sunday, 181,000 new cases. And what's last reported for Monday, 166,000 new cases. These blow away the numbers from when we shut down before. I mean, we're way beyond what we were shut down over. In fact, you look at a state like Michigan, who 30% of the total number of cases of COVID in the whole time that it's been going on have happened in the last 2 weeks. Massive explosion. And why is that? Well, our super spreader in chief was running around all throughout those states having his little love fests where all the MAGA hat wearing folks came out because we're going to show those libtards, we're going to show them this is a hoax. And now those areas are bombed. On Monday, we had more than 73,000 people in this country hospitalized with the virus. That is the most ever. And guess what? It's going to get worse, because as those big numbers of infections keep going up and up and up, the lag is, okay, you're tested positive, a couple days later, hospitalization. So the lag is the hospitalization. The lag is the death rates. So get ready for it, because we're going to see more people dying from this. And I know it's just a hoax. It's a way for the liberals who hate Thanksgiving. They hate family. They hate America. It's a way for them to ruin all the fun. It's what it is. They're going to ruin all the fun. And no turkey for you. Now, don't worry about Christmas. The war on Christmas might come if you live through Thanksgiving. This is the great part of all of this, because all of the people who send me, I'm going to have a big family Thanksgiving just to spite you. And I'm going, buddy, you're not spiting me. I still believe in individual responsibility. I still totally believe in you are responsible for yourself. And I know we hate the nanny state, but you know what? They're trying to protect you from guess who? You. Stupid only goes so far. And this is one of those things where, I joke with my kids, and my kids, they're old, a little bit older now. My two youngest are 12 and 14, so they've gotten dad's humor. When people do dumb stuff like, we're going to have a big Thanksgiving. And I go, good. It's a way to thin the herd. This is how we get rid of, this is how the stupid people don't reproduce. And for far too long, and this is where I agree with conservatives, for far too long we've been the nanny state. For far too long we've protected the ones who weren't dumb enough, who weren't smart enough to do dumb things and make it through. But we protected them with helmets and all kinds of things. Let the dumb kids go. And in this case, let the dumb adults go. If you're so stupid that, no, we're going to have grandma and grandpa over for Thanksgiving. We're going to have 100 people crowd into a room because we're going to show those libtards. There's something wrong with you. And when you're burying granny and grandpa, that's on you. It's called personal responsibility. And maybe, I used to believe that old people were smart because they lived long enough. If granny and gramps are stupid enough to come to your anti-libtard, Thanksgiving, then maybe we could do without them too. And I know, you're just being mean. I'm so tired of this already. So tired. So tired of the guy who failed high school biology telling the rest of us that we're all wrong. Now, I hope, as I said at the beginning, I hope you got your toilet paper because the shelves are emptying quickly. So if you don't have it now, screech over to your local whatever store and grab as much as you can because we got to get back to hoarding. Because evidently that's what we do too. Because here in Pennsylvania, and we're so far we've missed the bullet. So far, it's getting worse. And we've got a Secretary of Health, Rachel Levin, who is saying, hey, we need to prepare. We need our hospitals to prepare because we know there's a wave coming. We know that we've always known that the spike was going to happen. And we need to start planning for what is coming. And this is what a good government bureaucrat does. This is what somebody who is in the position of planning does. I know, and it's hard to believe, but they plan. They plan for what the worst possible scenario is. Ask my wife. I do this all the time. I live in the world of what's the absolute worst thing that can possibly happen. I plan for that. And if anything better happens, I'm happy because the horrible didn't happen. So even if it was just really bad, it still wasn't horrible because we made the proper plans for it. And maybe as a country, maybe as a government, maybe if we started thinking that way, I don't know, once again, maybe we'd be okay. Because here's the problem, and this is where I keep coming back to this personal responsibility thing. Because Republicans used to be the party of personal responsibility. They used to be the party of pull yourself up by your bootstraps, take control, be a man. They used to be that party. Now just a bunch of little whiners and complainers. Because, I don't get to have Thanksgiving with Grandma. Even though you're probably going to kill Grandma. But at least you get that short-term satisfaction. So what is our dear leader in the Republican Party doing? What's our fearless leader doing now? When he's not golfing, he's not allowing Biden's camp to do any transitioning. In fact, you now have the American Hospital Association, the American Medical Association, and the American Nurses Association all writing a letter to Donald Trump saying, hey, how about some of that transition? How about getting the smart people to come in so that we can maybe clean up the mess that you've made? Just a thought. The Biden teams need real-time data. They need information on what our supply system is. Because unlike what Donald Trump did, made states go out and beg on their own, Biden will have a national plan to where if you have a massive surge in a certain area, we, as the federal government, will put resources where it's needed. Testing supplies, PPE, all the things that, Trump didn't. And yet, you've got the Trump administration dragging their feet. So when they're not dragging their feet, when they're not gridlocking and obstructing the transition, of which, like it or not, Donald Trump lost, when he's not obstructing that, he's still complaining about, evidently he thinks he won, because just a little bit ago, he fired Chris Krebs. You may know Chris Krebs as the guy who worked, I used the past tense because he just fired him. He just fired him because Chris Krebs had the audacity to say that this election was the most secure in history. Trump just tweeted out about an hour and a half ago, the recent statement by Chris Krebs on the security of the 2020 election was highly inaccurate, in that there were massive improprieties and fraud, including dead people voting, poll watchers not allowed into polling locations, glitches in the voting machines, which changed votes from Trump to Biden, late voting, and many more. Therefore, effective immediately, Chris Krebs has been terminated as Director of Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security. Hey, I'm sure our security grids are thrilled that the guy who was in charge of all that has just been canned. Hey, Russia, if you're listening, vulnerable now. All because, dear leader, not happy. Now, you go through his list of grievances. Dead people were voting. Were there a couple of dead people that probably sent mail-in ballots early? Yeah, there probably were. And there always have been. You send in a ballot, someone dies between then and then. There are states that still count them, because when you cast it, you were still alive. There was the case of the Republican here in Pennsylvania who did send the dead relatives ballot in, but we're not going to get into that kind of stuff. He goes into the poll watchers weren't allowed into polling places. Nonsense. They've already thrown that out. And the glitches in the voting machine, I'm with you. We should never have voted on an electronic voting machine. Which leads me to another tweet that Trump sent out. He actually subtweeted the elections officials of Canada, who are trolling us right now. It's pretty bad when Canada is trolling us. They tweeted out, Elections Canada does not use Dominion voting systems. We use paper ballots counted by hand in front of scrutinizers and have never used voting machines or electronic tabulators to count votes in our 100-year history. Something I've been saying we should have been doing all along, should have never brought the voting machines in, but you know what? They're here. And if there were glitches in it, there were glitches in it the last time and the time before that. So you had 4 years to do something about it. You didn't. And oh, by the way, not buying it. Still not buying it. Still not buying the glitch argument. But here's the thing, and this is where, when President-elect Joe Biden takes office, where I hope he goes. I hope he goes and says, look, there's a problem with our election security. This is what a leader does. So if Donald Trump, you're listening, this is what you should have done in 2016. This is what a leader does. They say there's a problem. Whether it changed the outcome or of the election one way or another, it's over. It's done. I am now the president. I am going to fix this problem so it's never questioned again, so that we have solid faith in the integrity of what comes out of that ballot box. And we do away with all the electronic voting machines, completely chuck the whole thing. We revamp our entire national way of conducting elections to going back to hand-marked paper ballots with scrutinizers from both parties. And Donald Trump loves to say, they weren't there. They were there. In fact, Pennsylvania just threw out one of his so-called wins in court. So he's now up to like 25 losses or 26 losses and no wins. And the places where, and I love this is the greatest story of the day in my view. The place where he was successful, and that is convincing, Republicans not to vote by mail-in ballot. I look to Georgia. And I'll tell you, this Raffensperger guy, and I'm going to learn how to pronounce his name one of these days. This guy is a true patriot. And I love this guy now. Evidently, he came out today and said, look, Donald Trump would have won Georgia had Trump not interfered and blocked and suppressed the votes, the Republican votes in Georgia. He told a news organization that 24,000 Republicans voted by absentee ballot in the primary, and they didn't cast a ballot in the general election. Now this is how they're able to drill down and to know exactly who's voting and who isn't. 24,000 Republicans voted in the primaries and didn't in the general. And he's saying, look, this is linked to the fact that Trump demonized vote by mail, where you had these people who, they didn't feel comfortable going out and voting. They took the personal responsibility of saying, I'm not going to expose myself to the potential of getting sick. And I know this, again, is something that Republicans are in this moment of Trump cultism, we're a little short on. But these 24,000 people said, I'm not going to risk myself. I'm not going to risk dying over this. And, Donald Trump has told me it's fraudulent, it's a waste of time, so I'm not going to do it. So it quite frankly, could have cost him the election. And there's some poetic justice in that if you really stop and think about it. I kind of like the irony there. The beauty of the simplicity. He got what he wanted, and it bit him in the behind. And finally, this segment, the one story that I saw earlier today that gave me some hope that maybe there's a possibility of returning to some bit of normalcy. I saw that Conan and O'Brien, who I didn't even know Conan O'Brien was still doing a TV show, he's ending his late night show. I guess it was on HBO. He's now going to be doing some other thing on HBO. And I'm going, I don't really care about Conan O'Brien. I've watched him. I think he's funny. But the fact that got into the news feed gave me a little bit of hope that maybe around the corner, maybe once we get this virus under control, maybe some bit of normalcy. Just my thought. Love to hear yours. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Quick break.
There's nothing more American than workers standing up, and the union gives a voice to win. On the Rick Smith Show.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1785. That was the day the General Society of Mechanics and Tradesmen of the City of New York was founded. 22 skilled craftsmen with the motto, by hammer in hand, all arts do stand, met on Pine Street to form a benevolent organization that could provide culture, education, and social services to craftsmen and their families. 2 months later, founders met for their annual meeting. They represented many of the city's trades, including hatters, butchers, sailmakers, bolters, and comb makers. In his book, Chance Democratic, historian Sean Willits states, the General Society was intended to be a semi-political umbrella organization for all of the city's independent mechanics, to help oversee the trades and secure favorable legislation from local and national government. The group captured the ideal of mutuality and craft pride essential to artisan fraternities since the Middle Ages. The General Society opened one of the city's first free schools at a time when there were no public schools. It established a tuition-free Mechanics Institute, the General Society Library, and lecture series. The Mechanics Institute, founded in 1858, continues to provide free evening trades-related instruction. The library, established in 1820, is the second oldest library in New York City. It is also one of the few remaining membership-circulated libraries. Its collections and archives span 2 centuries. The General Society continues its tradition of public lectures in the form of the Labor, Literature, and Landmark series. More recently, it has added the Artesian Lecture series that features lectures by master artisans. The series also promotes the work and art of skilled craftsmen. The General Society has been at its current location at 20 West 44th Street since 1885.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now,
story of a legal coup in the Trump campaign. Evidently, Rudy and his clan are taking over the legal aspect of the Trump campaign, of which reportedly he's getting 20 grand a day. I got to tell you, I really think he's going to get stiffed by Trump on 20 grand a day, and honestly, I think he should, because not really good results. I think if you're paying a lawyer 20 grand a day, you should at least look somewhat decent. But as I was reading about those stories, I came across one of my favorite columnists, Will Bunch over at the Philly Daily News, who had a piece out today on how Trump became all of America's Frank Rizzo. There was a line that he had right there that summed up Giuliani, the whole Trump legal team. He wrote, with a courtroom strategy for overlooking his election loss that makes my cousin Vinny look like Clarence Darrow. I don't know why I couldn't stop laughing, but I could not stop laughing. And here to share some thoughts on his recent article, I've asked our good friend Will Bunch to come talk with us. Will, thanks for taking time for us.
Hey, Rick, thanks for having me back on the show. I appreciate it.
I don't know why that made me laugh as much. I laughed for like a good 2 or 3 minutes.
It was okay. I don't know if it was that funny, but I'm really glad you liked it. So
I think it was the time. I think it was, I was reading about Giuliani and I saw 20 grand a day for his services, whatever those are. And I go, yeah, that is a perfect description.
I saw somebody actually said on Twitter, which I thought was hysterical, that this is like the first time in his career that Trump would actually be justified in sticking one of his contractors and not paying him.
Well, that was me. I said that too.
Was that you? Oh, okay, that was great. That was great.
I said, because I don't think I would pay him, because he's done a horrible job, but. And thank goodness Donald chooses such wonderful representation. But to your article, one of the things that you've been writing about and you've been spot on, and I've been talking about here on the show is, Trump's bad. He's as bad as he can be. If we got somebody who was less Trump, but still Trump, we'd be really screwed as a country, because if you look at Pennsylvania, Trump won Pennsylvania.
Well, I mean, Trump won Pennsylvania in 2016, and
no. Trump would have won Pennsylvania had it been not for Joe Jorgensen.
Yeah, I've seen people make that point, and it's absolutely right. Or I think even more so if the Democrats had not succeeded in getting the Green Party's Howie Hawkins off the ballot,
right?
Which would have peeled votes away from Biden. That was a totally barely covered event back in the summer, and I always have mixed feelings about that. I mean, I don't find third parties particularly helpful in the current environment when we have the Republican Party trying to basically do a fascist style takeover of this country. I don't think the Green Party pulling off votes is really that helpful. But on the other hand, I don't like to see that when Democrats play hardball tactics to throw people off the ballot.
No, I'm with you, which is why I'm a fan of ranked choice voting. Yeah,
exactly. I agree, and that would be a great solution to that problem. Absolutely. But so in a pro-democracy sense, I don't like to see that. But in a real politique, as they call it, sense, that was huge for the Democrats. And the bigger point here, though, is, I mean, the Democrats, I think. It's great that Joe Biden won, but I think clearly you can't go slapping yourself on the back about this election, and not just because of the specifics of losing a half dozen or more seats in the House, not doing quite as well in the Senate as they'd hoped, and probably depending on what happens in Georgia, or possibly having Mitch McConnell still stay in control. But when you dig even deeper, I mean, look at the city of Philadelphia, for example. If we're going to talk about Pennsylvania. They were hoping that Joe Biden would do better than Hillary Clinton did, because Hillary Clinton's disappointment was Hillary Clinton's performance was not as good as Barack Obama's. They were hoping to maybe get back to those levels with Biden. There's a lot of resentment of Trump, it was believed, in various Philadelphia communities, and that didn't happen. He underperformed, and Trump really turned his people out in the most white working class neighborhoods of the city, and he also something that we saw nationwide is in Philadelphia's heavily Latino communities. Trump didn't necessarily win, but he got many more votes than he got in 2016.
Yeah.
And in my next to last column, the one that ran a few days ago, I talked about places like the Rio Grande Valley in South Texas, where there you saw counties that went 2-1 for Hillary Clinton 4 years ago were actually won in a couple cases or almost won in a couple other cases by Trump. I mean, just a huge reversal. And, you saw this in other Hispanic communities in California. Biden performed terribly in Miami-Dade County in Florida, and obviously some of that is the Keaton community, which is very anti-communist, but he did worse than other Democrats had in the past. So I think the Democrats should look at this, should look inside themselves. They really should dig deep and say these are voters that have voted Democratic in the very recent past. These are people who voted for Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton, and in 2020 they voted for Donald Trump. So how did we lose these people? And the answers to these questions aren't always comfortable. You're going to have to look at the effect of this summer's protests and the way people talked about the police, for example.
I mean, the defund the police thing was the worst thing Democrats could have gotten themselves. It could have gotten tied around their neck, and Trump used it. Trump used fear, really effectively, and it goes back to something that I remember from a college psychology class that said when you scrape your knee, you go to mommy. When you get into real trouble, you go to daddy. And sadly, as a country, we're in trouble. People are afraid. Republicans played the fear card really well, so a lot of people ran to the person they thought was daddy, and that was Donald Trump.
Yeah, well, I mean, they took the most politically they took the most extreme position among the various groups that were protesting, right? And the most extreme, not even position really, but the most extreme slogan in terms of defund the police, because. As you well know, Rick, I mean, most Democrats were not running on a defund the police a platform. Certainly not Joe Biden. Certainly not the moderate Democrats like Conor Lamb out there in Western Pennsylvania. But even most of the more progressive Democrats were not running on that. And I don't want to go off on a long tangent on that because I do think. I'm disappointed the Democratic Party hasn't come up with a more coherent police reform agenda because I think the police in this country need radical reform. I just wouldn't necessarily I think most of us agree at this point that you wouldn't want to label that as defunding though, because that to most voters has just a different connotation. But,
no,
there's that, but there's also more than that. I mean, there's the socialist label, one thing that I thought was really interesting post-election was the number of working class, when I say working class, I'm including black and brown working class voters who said, hey, Trump sent me a $1,200 check this summer. It's like the stimulus worked, and not just it worked economically. It was a good program, but it worked politically for Trump. He put his name on those checks, and it had the desired political effect for him. People noticed, and in my column, and my note, I just can't help but think that if Trump had been a little bit smarter, if he'd figured out some way to do, to get, and maybe Mitch McConnell wouldn't have let him do it, but if he could have figured out some way to have done a second stimulus package right before the election.
He tried, if you remember. He tried with the gift cards to Granny.
He did briefly at the last minute. Yeah. Oh, yeah, the gift. Yeah, right.
He tried with the gift cards to Granny, something to put his name on. And look, Mitch McConnell, there's part of me that thinks McConnell threw him under the bus deliberately, knowing that the party has to purge themselves of him. And then the next strong man is going to come in who will be the really effective one, somewhat charismatic, not as much of a lightning rod, but the same horrible policies and the same kind of authoritarian tendencies that we evidently in this country seem to, at least half of us, want.
Yeah, which is horrifying. I mean, I do think in the case of McConnell, I mean, I think McConnell is, plays a long game, and I think McConnell plays a game where he feels like he wins if there's a Republican president, but he feels like he wins also if there's a Democratic president. He shifts tactics, obviously. Look at how he was able to shut down Merrick Garland when there was a Democrat in the White House and keep the seat open, and then he was able to jam through Amy Coney Barrett when there was a Republican in the White House. I think, somehow he played his cards on all the judicial openings. So, over the last 12 years, 8 of them were the Democrat and 4 of them was Republican. The Republicans netted so many more judges than the Democrats, McConnell is, he's a psychopath, basically. He's totally amoral. He has no ideology or no agenda that's really aimed at helping voters. He's just a strictly Machiavellian power play kind of guy who, wants to do certain things for his donors, like getting right-wing judges, pro-business judges on the courts, and because he has no morals, he's very good at it. This is something that Joe Biden, as 46th president of the United States, is going to have to deal with somehow.
Yeah.
And it's going to be really tough. And even if I really think it could go either way in these Georgia runoff elections. You have to be so impressed with these women of color and others who just organize voters and organize turnout. Really, particularly in a state with such a horrible history of voter suppression, what they were able to accomplish down there was really one of the most amazing feel-good accomplishment stories of the entire election cycle. And so maybe they can do it again in the runoff, which would be great. In which case the Senate would be 50-50. You'd have Kamala Harris breaking ties, but you'd also have to worry if anything is too, quote, progressive, unquote, whether somebody like a Joe Manchin or some other Democrat peels off, and that problem. And then, of course, if the Republicans win those 2 runoff elections, they'll have a 52-48 majority, and Mitch McConnell will be the majority leader.
And nothing gets done legislatively.
No, there's no, and in fact, depending on how hard a hardball he wants to play, he could force his own cabinet. He could force the most conservative Democrat you could possibly think of as his cabinet choices. Honestly, I don't think Biden is really going to make Bernie Sanders Labor Secretary or Elizabeth Warren Treasury Secretary anyway, regardless of what Mitch McConnell does. But clearly anything of that nature would just be off the table if Mitch McConnell is still the Senate Majority Leader.
Yeah, but wouldn't that be a good negotiating tactic? We're going to throw out the most, like any negotiation, you're going to throw out the most extreme person and make them publicly fight against them so that you get the person you really wanted.
Yeah, Biden is surrounding himself with people who are smart political tacticians, and so maybe he's playing a game like that too to some degree. But and the thing is, what's really sad though is, it's really what a commentary it is on what our political system has become. Because when we were first following these things, if you go back to the 80s or 70s, or I don't know how old you are actually, Rick, but when I started following politics in the 80s, things weren't always hunky-dory all the time, but it was just almost unheard of for a cabinet nominee to be voted down unless there was some real impropriety.
Right. Usually they got caught not paying the housekeeper as an employee. They were paying them under the table.
Well, that was that's when it really kind of started with Clinton and the housekeeper thing. But even then, at least they had to find, to make that happen, you had to find some allegation of,
some impropriety.
Corruption. Yeah, impropriety. That's the word I was looking for. Yeah, something like that. Whereas now, somebody could be rejected just because they're a Democrat. or Republican, but to my knowledge, I mean, few, if any, of Trump's cabinet choices were rejected. I guess some never came up for a vote because they thought they wouldn't pass. But you know, like this Chad Wolf character, for example, at Homeland Security. But you know, I mean, there was John Tower, who the Democrats stopped as defense secretary, but I think he allegedly had a drinking problem or something. I mean, it was stuff like that. But now you're going to see, you know, every cabinet vote is going to be a cliffhanger, right? And it's just going to be no way to run it. It's going to be no way to run a government.
Yeah. So let me ask you this then, because, you know, Trump has led the way and acting this or that. I mean, is this a moment where Biden just goes, you know what, we're in the middle of a pandemic. We've got so much to clean up, so much to do. We don't have time for all this. We're going to put acting people into these positions, and we're moving forward whether you confirm them or not.
Well, it may come to that, and you know, between what Trump has done and what Mitch McConnell might do in terms of going to extremes to block nominees, you know, I think in the short term Biden would be justified in doing that. I mean, again, it's something that's just horrible for our democracy. You know, I mean, the same thing with this idea that without the Senate, that Biden is going to have to govern by executive order. You know, I'm sure you've heard, maybe some of your guests in the last week or two have been talking about that.
Sure.
You know, that you know, on climate change, for example, you know, I think climate change, there actually is a lot of leeway for him to act on executive order, or the big issue this week about canceling student debt and doing that, but, you know, could he do that by executive order? And, you know, I mean, some of these things he legitimately can. Some of them are kind of a stretch, you know. And I was one of those people, you know. I'm going back 15 years now to the heyday of the George W. Bush administration. I was one of those liberals who was complaining about Bush and his signing statements. Remember those, where
Sure.
where Congress would pass a bill and he would say, "Well, I don't really believe this part of the bill is good," or, you know, or they'd claim it was unconstitutional when it wasn't, or something like that. And we're just not going to do this thing that.
Yeah, we've got to most certainly figure out how we do this in a better way, but still get things done. Again, the piece is how Trump became the all of America's Frank Rizzo's, written by Will Bunch. We'll get links out on how they can take a look at that. Will, I got to take a quick break. I appreciate the time, man, and you do fabulous work. Thanks so much.
Oh, thanks, Rick, for having me. I really appreciate it. Thanks for having me on.
Good
Take
stuff.
care.
Our good friend Will Bunch. Quick break, right back. Stick around.
Remembering that united we bargain, divided we beg. Rick Smith.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1747. That was the day that a crowd of Boston workers took British officers as hostages and held them for 3 days. The workers were outraged that fellow Bostonians had been pressed into service on British Navy ships against their will. Impressing ship crews was one of the ways the British manned their ships when there were not enough willing crew members. The seaport at Boston had become so notorious for this kind of worker kidnapping that other merchant vessels had begun to avoid the area for fear that their crews might be taken by the British Navy. Bostonians became increasingly vocal against the practice and worried about its impact on the local economy. In 1745, the local selectmen petitioned for, quote, immediate relief from impressment. They wrote that it was a matter that, quote, nearly affects the liberties of the people and is a great insult upon this government. 2 years later, Commodore Charles Knowles sailed into Boston on his way to the West Indies. While he resupplied and refit his ships, some of his crew members escaped from service. To make up his diminished crew, on November 16th, Knowles ordered local workers to be rounded up as replacements. Fed up, Bostonians detained members of the British fleet, including one of Knowles' lieutenants. The Massachusetts governor, William Shirley, was able to persuade Knowles not to retaliate. He helped to facilitate an exchange, the impressed Bostonians for the British hostages. That January, a young Samuel Adams founded the newspaper The Independent Advertiser, published to defend the rights and liberties of mankind. The paper commended the mob for standing up to impressment. Samuel Adams would go on to become a leader in the American Revolution. Like what you hear? Check out more at laborhistoryin2.com.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So, one of the things that we've been talking about is how exactly is Joe Biden going to get anything done? And one of the things that I saw the other day that I'm like, we absolutely do need to do some things on is student loan debt and helping the future of students and the student loan crisis that's going on. And here to share some thoughts on how we do just that. I've asked our good friend Helene Olin to come talk with us. Helene is the great opinion writer over at the Washington Post. And I'm having one of those moments with my computer that evidently just driving me absolutely insane. Helene, thanks for taking time for us.
Hey, thank you for having me on.
Having a tech nightmare as we're speaking. So I appreciate you taking time for us. As I said, one of the things that we've been talking about is how's Biden going to get things done? What's going to be the first thing out of the bag? And student loan debt seems to be one of the things that has popped up, as Chuck Schumer has said that they're looking at maybe forgiving the first $50,000 in student loan debt. I'm curious your thoughts.
Well, let's backtrack for a minute. So what's coming up is that unless Democrats win both Senate elections in Georgia on January 5th, Biden is going to be mostly governing, most likely, by executive order / regulatory change, right? Because short of the Republicans having the quote epiphany that he says they're going to have when he's in office, he's not going to have a lot of, wiggle room in the Senate, basically. So one of the ideas that has come up, there's all sorts of ideas that have come up, is centered around student loans. Student loans, as we all know, became something of an issue in the primaries. Both, Bernie Sanders wanted to forgive all of them. Elizabeth Warren proposed forgiving a portion of them. Both Sanders and Warren coupled it with free public college tuition. Biden sort of put together a proposal where he offered $10,000 in forgiveness to everybody, and then some more enhanced forgiveness to people who went to public colleges and historic Black colleges and universities. So what seems to have bubbled up is whether he will do any forgiveness at all. Trump has suspended student loan payments till the end of the year as part of the coronavirus relief packages that were passed. He actually did it partly by executive order, which is part of why people believe Biden can now do something via executive order. Prior to that, it was not totally clear, but he used a provision in the Higher Ed Act that was not challenged. So this is actually a very big deal as a result. Now, what Biden will do is totally, completely unclear. On Twitter, obviously, you see a lot of excitement about the idea that he's going to cancel all student loan debt. I'll believe that when my 14-year-old dog wakes up at 4.5 years old, when I first got her, all over again.
Right.
It just doesn't seem very likely. It seems like one of these arguments to nowhere. What he'll do is unknown. And the reason it bubbled up, I should say, is because Chuck Schumer has been talking about forgiving $50,000 in loans. This talk seems to have come up very suddenly from him over the past few months, is most likely related to the fact he thinks he's going to get a challenge from his left in the New York primary for Senate in 2022. He never really expressed much, passion about this topic prior to this fall. So will Biden forgive $10,000? I think it's possible. But what I would say is I think it's a good start. Would I like to see more forgiveness? Yes, but I will say that bigger forgiveness by itself doesn't really get us that far. It obviously is going to make for a cohort of very lucky winners, but it's also going to cause some problems, and the problems are twofold. The bigger sort of macro problem is that it's not most likely going to be accompanied by any meaningful tuition reform, because that would require,
Right.
free public college would require, legislative action. You can't do that via executive order. You can do it state by state, but you can't do it,
Right. So
nationally
we're
via
just setting
executive.
up the next generation to be in the same boat
Right.
of this generation.
Right. So you just created a new class of winners and losers. And in fact, you might have even set up a moral hazard situation where people think they're going to get forgiven the money. So they'll go borrow even more, and colleges will even raise their tuitions even more. And hey, maybe you'll get forgiveness or maybe not, right? You don't know. So that's a big problem. Another problem that has cropped up, and I think people are kind of feckless to dismiss it, frankly, is what about people who paid off their loans? And while I think you could dismiss somebody who paid off their loans 30 years ago, like me, because, by this point I've got kids that I'm dealing with, right? I've got a bigger issue here. I think people who've paid them off in the past 5 to 10 years might have a legitimate gripe. And more to the fact of whether I think they have a legitimate gripe or not, they most certainly will think they had a legitimate gripe. And I don't care how many goody two-shoes go on Twitter and say, hey, I paid off my loans last year, and, I'm all for forgiveness. I'll deal with it. We live in the United States. Come on.
Or for those people who worked their way through school and didn't take out
Right,
loans at
and-
all. Look, there's a lot to it. You're absolutely right.
Right. And I mean, the thing I would say is, and again, this comes down to the limits of executive action, is the ideal would probably be to give them some form of tax credit. Again, 30 years ago, who cares? Tough luck, right? Your life goes on. But the past 10 years probably deserves something.
But the other part of this, you bring up the 30 years ago. 30 years ago, tuitions were much lower. And, the amount that states picked up, like here in Pennsylvania, if you went to a state system school here, one of the 14 state run higher ed institutions, about 2/3 of the tuition was picked up by the state and the local governments. You picked up about a third. Today, kids going to school in those same universities, they're paying 3/4 of the tuition, whereas the state and the local governments are paying about a quarter. So they are being saddled with much more of the cost, and thus having to pick up much more of the student loans, which is why I think we absolutely have to help them. But you're right, there's going to be that argument.
Right. And I just think it's, we live in a country where, as I point out to people repeatedly, general rule of thumb is we don't like benefits that aren't universal. So, the counter argument is, well, we shouldn't be giving $10,000 to upper middle class professionals, to which my response is, well, good luck getting the thing through then. I mean, and good luck not getting a massive, pushback to that as well. Because that's what we like in this country. We like universal benefits. Social Security is untouchable. Medicare is so popular that people say get the government's hands off of it. There's a reason everybody is eligible for it.
Right. Yeah, we can't get Medicare for all, universal health care for everybody.
Right. I mean, right, because it's, the people are scared of losing what they have. I'm going to digress for a second. I think it would become a much more popular option if somebody would just do it and say you can keep what you have too if you want, because I guarantee you within 5 years, no one will keep what they have.
Right.
But the real issue, of course, is the insurance companies don't want it. So good luck. But in the hospitals.
And employers want the control over their workforce.
Right.
There's a lot of people stay at crappy jobs because they need the health care, which is why you don't hear employers screaming from the mountaintops going, get this off our backs, it's crushing us. Because it's harming employers and their ability to get people. But it's just another one of those control mechanisms.
Right. I completely agree. It took me a while to come around to that, I should say. So before anybody thinks we're talking conspiratorially here. But, the fact of the matter is the numbers are so ghastly that it is actually the only explanation that makes sense. Because in any rational world, employers should be begging the federal government to get this burden out of their lives. It's, it's your employee, if you're a family of 4 and your employer's paying some decent amount towards your insurance, it's over $20,000 a year at this point. I mean, it's really insanely high numbers. And for the most part, you're probably not paying the majority of that. So it's just sort of staggering what the burden is. It adds over $1,000 to the price of a car. I mean, you can go on and on what it does.
And it's all that control mechanism. But you're right on the universal part of things, that we like to think that they're universal for everyone, except for the healthcare, because we've been trained like Pavlovian dogs to think that somehow is socialism.
Right. Or, I think it's more that people are afraid that it will be worse, is my suspicion of what's going on. I don't know that they really think it's socialism. Most people intuitively get Medicare is not socialism. But I do think there is a fear that it will be worse. And the counter argument has always been, well, you can't do Medicare for all and let people have a choice of getting out because it'll screw with the financing of it. To which my response is, I don't really care because I think it's a very short-term problem.
Right. That's why I was in favor of a public option. Let me buy Medicare. Fix a price to it. Let me know how much it is. Let me buy into it. Let me get a supplement. Like my grandmother had, and let the competition work.
Right.
They love to talk about how much they love the free market. How about we give that a shot?
Right. Let people buy into Medicare. See how it goes. You can even make a profit on it.
No, I mean,
let them mark it up a bit.
Right, but just from common sense, you're talking one giant insurance pool.
Right.
It's not social, but it's not rocket science. It's common sense.
Well, I think the bigger issue is there are certain things that are probably not really suitable for the for-profit system. And my guess, and I would believe that healthcare is probably among them. I don't want to oversell it. Obviously, in Europe, where they have various forms of universal healthcare, they're having as many problems with COVID as we are. So it's clearly not a cure-all for everything that is wrong with the medical system. But I think at the same time, at least somebody in Europe doesn't fear going bankrupt if they end up in the hospital with COVID. And that's a big difference.
No, I'm right there with you. This is most certainly something we're going to have to work on. I wanted to get your thoughts because you're one of my go-to economic people who, I just find fascinating. And in fact, you've written a couple of books on this. You're the author of Pound Foolish and the co-author of The Index Card, which I hope people will take a look at, and we'll get links out on how you can do that. But today, the big news is this Judy Shelton. Evidently another roadblock to becoming the sitting on the Fed. I'm curious your thoughts on Ms. Shelton.
Well, I think, I do think you're seeing some small glimmers of responsibility by the Republican Party at this point. I mean, they stalled out her nomination for 16 months. They obviously, didn't do that to curry favor with Donald Trump from the get-go. Judy Shelton is just somebody who has no business being in that job. I mean, I think most people, even crazy Republicans, I mean, the real fringe almost, would agree that somebody who would like to tie the dollar to the gold standard has no business being in the Fed in 2020, or hell, in 2000 or 1975 for that matter. And, this is a big issue, and Trump seems to be still trying to get this through. And I gather we've got about another 2 weeks to see if it really happens or not.
Yeah.
Mark Kelly will get sworn in. It'll be a lot harder to pull off once he's sworn in at the end of the month. And that's that's the Arizona Senate seat that he's taking from Martha McSally.
Good.
But it's just sort of staggering. I mean, I think the thing that always struck me with Donald Trump's economic appointees, and I would put Larry Kudlow in this, I would put Stephen Moore when he was trying that one, if you remember that, is how fundamentally unserious so many of them have been. It's almost like when he stumbled into somebody who was serious, it was almost by dumb luck. I don't think anybody could have predicted that Steve Mnuchin would be halfway decent at the job. I mean, and admittedly, it's sort of the tyranny of low expectations. I mean, in the land of the small people, it doesn't take a lot to be a giant. And before anybody thinks I'm insulting small people, I'm 4'11", okay? It really is not, right? I mean, he looks great. I mean, look who he's serving with, right? But, that's been this sort of staggering inability to take anything seriously, which is, been the sort of hallmark of the Trump presidency. He didn't take anything seriously. He treated it like it was a reality show. And, he got canceled, frankly. I know he lost the election, then got canceled.
There you go. I love that. But I want to go back to the gold standard thing because I hear this a lot from conservatives. We need to go back to the gold standard, and I've got my reasons why. I'm curious why you think that. Real quick explanation of why it's a bad idea.
Because you lose flexibility. If you tie your money to gold, you have no flexibility in when things go wrong, and things inevitably go wrong. This is part of what the problem was in the Great Depression. You couldn't do anything. So that's why people stop doing it. You can't flood. You can't. You can't.
Prime the pump.
Increase the supply of money, which helps stimulate the economy. And I mean, to be fair, it's not simply a matter of issues with gold. This is essentially part of what happened to Greece and some of the other European countries when they got into all that trouble with the euro, because they had given up the rights to control their own currency. They couldn't, basically inflate their way out of their problems. Inflation's not great, but it's certainly a hell of a lot better than the alternative.
Right. No, and I find it interesting that the people who are screaming, we need to go back to the gold standard, are Trump supporters. And you look at how much money that they've printed over the last couple of years. They had $1 trillion deficits every year, and that was without the pandemic.
Well, I mean, I think anybody who expects consistency from the Trump administration or Trump supporters, is basically going to be making themselves very miserable. I mean, one of the many things about the administration that I think drove people sort of batty, and again, contributed to the ultimate cancellation of the show, and I do think of it as a show in some ways, is that there was no consistency. Nothing was logical. It was in that weird land of reality TV where you would just say or do anything for the ratings in that moment. And, I can go on and on about my beef with Americans and logic and how they don't teach logic in the schools properly. But the fact of the matter is this whole thing has been logic challenged from, the day the man announced for president.
Excellent
If you look back to his campaign, he was both for and against raising the minimum wage. At one point, he was against the minimum wage at all. I mean, it's astonishing. And, if Joe Biden had done that, everybody would have been like, dude, you're senile, time to go, right? He's not. But, Trump, who did something that arguably, should have led to some serious questions, everybody was just like, oh, okay, because it's entertainment.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a good point. So I guess the last question I have for you, the civics or logic? Which do we teach?
Logic.
All right, so we chuck the civics for logic. I don't disagree, because there's so many things where you just go, did you really think about that?
Right, people, the ability to deduct will lead to good civic engagement, in my view. So
there you go, good stuff, Helene. I appreciate the time, as always. Fun talking with you. I appreciate it.
You're welcome. It's always fun to be on.
Good stuff. Our good friend Helene Olin. Make sure you check out her work over at the Washington Post. She does fantastic stuff there. We'll get links out to her most recent pieces. I'd love to hear your thoughts. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Quick break. Right back. Stick around.
Remembering that united we bargain, divided we beg. Rick Smith.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1947. That was the day the Screen Actors Guild voted to make all SAG members take an anti-communist loyalty oath. The late 1940s were the dawn of the U.S. Cold War with the Soviet Union. Anti-communist hysteria swept the nation. Hollywood became an early target of the communist witch hunt. Just a few days before the Screen Actors Guild vote, a group of screenwriters and directors, known as the Hollywood 10, were called before the House Un-American Activities Committee. This group denounced the House Committee's trial. For that, they were sentenced to a year in jail and then blacklisted. The anti-communist communist backlash had a chilling effect on Hollywood. Many in the movie industry were progressives, and some had actually attended meetings and other activities held by the American Communist Party. However, few of these movie industry people had actually identified as communists. The Screen Actors Guild attempted to head off continued congressional investigation by requiring union members to take a loyalty oath. Ronald Reagan was president of the Screen Actors Guild at the time it decided to implement the oath. Those who were blacklisted saw their careers disintegrate. Many screenwriters wrote screenplays under assumed names. One notable movie, The Salt of the Earth, was made by people who had been blacklisted. The movie was a true story about a 1951 zinc worker strike in New Mexico. The Hollywood Reporter declared the movie was made, quote, under direct orders of the Kremlin. Blacklisted writer Dalton Trumbo finally was able to write a screenplay under his own name thanks to actor Kirk Douglas. Douglas supported Trumbo to write the screenplay for the acclaimed film Spartacus. He insisted Trumbo use his own name. Sadly, far too many were not so courageous during the Red Scare.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show.
Remember when candidate Trump promised not only to wall out all migrants crossing our Mexican border, but also to make Mexico pay for his xenophobic wall? Well, Mexico hasn't paid a peso and won't. So he keeps running to Congress demanding that it pony up unlimited billions of our tax dollars for his pet political project. Aside from one token appropriation, however, Congress has said, no. But that's no hill for a narcissistic climber. Unable to get tax money legitimately, Trump has simply stolen it, taking money from the U.S. military budget. Ignoring the constitutional mandate that only Congress is empowered to control the flow of government money, Trump filched $6.1 billion from our military last year, snatched another $3.8 billion this month, and intends to swipe at least another $3.4 billion before the year is out. This executive reprogramming, as the White House euphemistically calls its daylight robbery, is being pulled off by masking Trump's wall obsession as a, quote, national emergency. The Pentagon brass has been yanking funds meant for the Army, Air Force, Navy, Marines, National Guard, and ultimately from our fighting forces. This is Jim Hightower saying, presidential autocracy aside, Trump's massive larceny raises three other interesting issues of public morality. One, his trickery sets a precedent, not only for future presidents, but also for our young people's behavior. Two, our Congress critters, especially Trump Republicans, are setting a new standard of craven meekness in the face of this direct executive assault on their authority and on our democracy. And three, by simply kissing off a budget loss of more than $13 billion, saying it's in excess of the military's needs, the Pentagon is admitting that the war machine is routinely taking way too much of the public's money.
What do the corporate powers from Wall Street to Walmart have in common? They hate the Hightower Lowdown. You can see why at www.hightowerlowdown.org.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So back on November 13th, you had a little excitement in my world anyway. I saw a WWE wrestler by the name of Zelina Vega who tweeted out that I support unionization. And didn't get an awful lot of attention until 2 hours later she was let go by the WWE, canned, fired, shown the door for simply stating what I think a lot of us, at least I hope a lot of us believe, that we support workers to collectively bargain for better wages, hours, conditions, to fight for a better life. Evidently not the WWE. And here to share some thoughts on, well, what happened to Ms. Vega and what's happened to the industry. And hopefully, as I've been saying, I hope every working person boycotts the WWE out of existence until they respect their workers. And here to talk about that, I've asked Steve New to come talk with us. Steve is an attorney focusing on union issues. Steve, thanks for taking time for us.
Hey, how are you doing?
I am good. So what do you make of this scenario? Miss Vega tweets this out and, well, contract not extended. let go on her own. What do you think of that?
Well, the sequence of events is a little bit up in the air right now. Both Ms. Vega and her husband are contracted to WWE.
Right.
And what a lot of people don't know is that WWE superstars are considered not to be employees of this large multi-billion-dollar publicly traded corporation, but they're independent contractors.
Correct.
WWE controls total everything about these professional wrestlers, what they wear, the music they come to the ring to. And I've been privy to viewing one of these independent contractor agreements for former WWE talent. WWE controls everything about these wrestlers, yet denies that they are employees for purposes of workers' comp, health insurance, and that kind of stuff. So most recently what led to this development is WWE put out a mandate. Some of its wrestlers were making significant income from side projects in their own names, yet on social media platforms, Twitch, and others. So WWE came, we own your likeness, we own you, and you're past November 12th or 13th. And it's my understanding Zelina Vega was making more on her Twitch account than she was being a contracted wrestler to WWE.
Right.
She didn't comply, and so WWE fired her. So, there's two parts to this. I'm a practicing lawyer. I'm also a huge wrestling fan. And there are two components to this. Number one, I believe WWE talent are mischaracterized as independent contractors, though no one has ever attempted to challenge that characterization as an independent contractor. And then the second part is, if ever an industry unionization and representation between the employers or the corporate interests and them, it's professional wrestlers. We're still acting like this is the 1930s, 1940s, where these wrestlers are concerned, or even the 70s or 80s, where, these guys had the freedom to move from one territory to another. If you were fed up with it down in Texas with the Von Erichs, and you didn't like the way they were doing business, come across the country and go to the North Carolina territory owned by the Crockett's, and that's the way things were. And these guys could make their own schedules, do what they wanted. It's not that way anymore. Ever since it's become more corporate, the workers' rights are just non-existent, yet the risks are very much real.
Right.
The risks to these wrestlers, they go out with no health insurance, no workers' compensation, none of that, and they perform. They put their bodies on the line, and the company can't even provide them with basic human rights like health insurance and workers' comp. So I think the time is long since passed for the unionization of the professional wrestling industry, at least that which is on television every week.
No, all of those things. I mean, I've been saying the same thing about MMA and all of these independent contractor-driven industries where they extract a huge amount of money from the labor that these folks put forth. But the argument you get back, Steve, is that they make a lot of money. These are superstars and they make a ton of money. But you don't ever think about all of the other people, all of the underlings that are in this as well. And I used to know a guy, years and years ago, he was a professional beat on. He was just a guy who got into the ring and got beat up every week. His job was to be a professional loser, and because it's all a show. And he was saying, he'd make like $500, $1,000 a week, which was good money back then, but it wasn't what the stars were making. And as you pointed out, no health insurance, no retirement, no workers' comp, none of that stuff. And when he got injured, he didn't get paid.
Exactly. And that's the way it was for the longest time. If you were injured and you couldn't make a show, you just didn't get paid. It didn't matter that you were a professional. And, you know, I know that WWE's arguments are that now they have wellness programs for addiction and substance abuse. And, you know, in the cases of catastrophic injury, like Darren Drozdov, who was rendered quadriplegic, you know, they give Legends deals. But, you know, for every Darren Drozdov, there is a Zelina Vega. WWE canceled Vicky Guerrero's Legends contract because she dared to have a podcast that WWE wasn't getting a percentage of. And so, you know, it's all about money. It always comes down to money. I'm here in southern West Virginia. This is the birthplace of labor rights. You know, they're called rednecks for a reason, and that's because the coal miners who were getting shot at by armed federal agents had red bandanas around their
Battle
necks.
of Blair Mountain, right.
The Battle of Blair Mountain, that's exactly right. I grew up about 30 miles from Blair Mountain in Mingo County. And so, you know, I hope we aren't doomed to repeat our history. I hope that, you know, this is going to be the 21st century. We should be living in the 2020s, not in the 1920s, rehashing old battles like if you control what someone wears, what someone says, how someone acts, how they perform, the ending of their matches, you're that person's employer, and you owe them certain rights, especially if you're profiting greatly. And the other thing that's so egregious about the World Wrestling Entertainment Independent Contractor Agreement, WWE ties the talent up for multiple years, for instance. You know, it may be a 5-year deal, so to speak. But WWE can execute an out in 90 days. So it's really just illusory, the length of this contract, whereas if the talent leaves and goes elsewhere, WWE takes the position that they are in a no-competition status for the remainder of the contract, whether they're paying that talent or not. You know, they obviously don't pay that talent if that talent leaves voluntarily or just says, hey, I'm not going to wrestle for you anymore. So that's another thing that seems so unfair about the bargaining position of the parties there, that WWE can escape a 5-year deal in 90 days, but that the talent is wrapped up to that in a no competition and can't go anywhere else like AEW or Impact Wrestling or Ring of Honor or Major League Wrestling and wrestle, you know, because WWE says you have a no compete for 5 years.
Now, are there any wrestling organizations that are unionized? I mean, are there any groups that have done this already?
There are no professional wrestling organizations which are unionized at present. I was encouraged. I have been tweeting SAG-AFTRA. I met the New York treasurer of New York's chapter of SAG-AFTRA in New York, WrestleMania week in April of 2018, and was very encouraged. And we can't solicit WWE talent to come to us. We have to have, you know, they have to come to us. We can't solicit them.
Why not?
And apparently it's just their rules. You know, ethically, NLRB rules, what have you, prevent them, at least according to the person that I spoke to.
Because they're not employees, right.
Right. And, you know, the other thing that gets a little bit complicated is whether a show like WWE Raw or WWE SmackDown is signatory to the SAG-AFTRA agreement. You know, if it's not a quote-unquote signatory show, there's very technical, legal, complicated rules about whether or not those talents can even belong to SAG-AFTRA. So, you know, it doesn't have to be SAG. I would like to see it be SAG-AFTRA because for a long time now, Vince McMahon has admitted that these aren't athletes.
They're performers.
Right? You know, Vince McMahon has said, hey, these are sports commissions. These are not athletes engaged in competitive sport. They're entertainers. The matches are predetermined. The endings are already determined. So let us be excused from your athletic commission rules.
Right.
Well, you can't have it both ways, Vince. You can't say that these are not athletes so that you get out from under the sports commission rules from state to state, and then on the other hand, argue that, well, this is sports entertainment.
Yeah, interesting. I mean, the more I'm looking at this, the more you go, why do the wrestlers put up with it? I know, I get it. This is their shot. This is their opportunity, to make a name for themselves, and this is the only way to go about it. But at some point, don't they have to see that, down the road they're kind of screwed?
I think that they have to. And I tell you where I think this is really going to come into play. WWE has a new competitor called All Elite Wrestling. It's owned by the Khan family, who own the Jacksonville Jaguars. They also own a football club in Great Britain. And what I would really like to see is that for Tony Khan, his brilliant legal team that I've had some dealings with already, go out there and really say, look, we're going to be the new industry standard for the professional wrestling industry. And All Elite Wrestling, we're going to have employees. We're on TNT on every Wednesday night. Our wrestlers are employees. We give them health benefits. We give them workers' comp. We give them a chance to buy into a pension program and, really set the bar. And I think once that Vince McMahon and the WWE start to feel the pressure from that, or if perhaps there were a derivative lawsuit, a shareholders lawsuit, saying, look, we don't like the way that you treat WWE talent like Zelina Vega, that's the only way I believe WWE is going to ever do the right thing.
Right. So, I was reading something the other day, maybe you can confirm it, that they had tried to unionize in years past. And it's one of those things where I don't know, again, I don't know if this is true or not, but the story said that it was Hulk Hogan that basically undermined the entire thing. Is there any truth to that?
That's always been the story. Jesse Ventura was the one who attempted that. And I think that Jesse got the idea of that. When these professional wrestlers go to Hollywood, that they start to realize the benefits of belonging to a union.
Right.
And Jesse did when he went to work on Predator. I don't know whether Hogan joined when he was Thunderlips in Rocky III, but that's neither here nor there. But the long told story in the professional wrestling industry was that Jesse the Body Ventura was attempting to unionize the WWF wrestlers to try to get better conditions. That's when steroids were rampant and guys were dying young, and everything like that was going on. And that Hulk Hogan went behind his back to Vince McMahon and let McMahon know what was going on. And that was quickly shut down. And there were messages sent through the locker room. Look, if you take part in Ventura's union idea, you'll be blackballed out of the professional wrestling industry and so on and so forth. So that's long been the rumor in the professional wrestling industry. I've never seen any what we call shoot interviews of Ventura, but I think it's pretty much established fact in wrestling folklore now.
Yeah, it's just, again, one of those things where another reason I never liked Hulk Hogan. And I just never did. And this is, just plays right into that. Because, the sad reality is at the end of the day, if you don't have a voice, you're not going to get a fair share of what your labor creates. And the WWE is a perfect example of that. This is a multi-billion-dollar operation where, they pay.
Right.
I think they pay their top stars pretty well. but not like they should be, not like you see in other sports where they have profit sharing agreements and they get a percentage of the pie. You know, and which would include their side work and all of the other stuff that the WWE, I guess, makes money off of, right?
That's exactly right. I mean, the NFLPA, for instance, you know, and I'm a financial backer at an NFL agency, and my partner is a licensed NFL agent, and so I'm familiar with those standardized NFL contracts. Now, under the 2011 CBA, they're not quite as lucrative as other contracts used to be, but the union as a whole is very powerful. You know, so is the NBA and the MLB. You know, they really make sure that those guys get a fair share of the wealth that they're creating for their on-field or on-court talent. And the problem with the wrestling industry is this. I once heard an old wrestling manager by the name of J.J. Dillon say that wrestlers are like pigeons, and wherever you throw the feed, that's where the flock of pigeons is going to go to.
Right.
And you know, some guy is always thinking, well, if I stooge out one of the top guys, or if he gets hurt, or if he's not liked in the office, then that's my chance at advancement right there.
Yeah, but that's not just wrestling. That's every industry and every occupation you'll ever have. You've always got that scab who's looking to climb up on somebody else's back.
Well, that's exactly right. That's what we referred to in the Army as the Klingon method of promotion. You know, so that's the same in the professional wrestling industry. You know, these guys know that, hey, if I take this guy out who's above me, or if I play ball with the corporate masters, you know, they'll like me enough to push me, and I'll get the big contract, and I'm going to be The Rock, or I'm going to be Stone Cold. Well, you know, there's not very many Dwayne The Rock Johnsons around. There aren't very many Stone Cold Steve Austins around. You know, there are an awful lot of guys like your friend that you were mentioning who was a jobber, who had a 5-year career with the WWE, but his body's all busted up now, you know, and he can't do what he needs to do to provide for his family. But you know, he was on WWE TV getting beat every week for 5 years. So
last line of questioning
you're
I've got
exactly
for you.
Right.
So last line of questioning I've got for you then, because ultimately I'm with you. They should be organized like the NBA, like the NFL, like the NHL, you know, like the major sports operations, because ultimately it is a major sport, even if it is, you know, mostly fake and mostly, you know, totally scripted. Not that the physical part of it isn't real. I'm not going there, but you know how, because look, I can't do.
You watched 2020 back in the day, right?
I can't do that stuff. I don't want to be slammed on the ground. I don't want, even if it is only half their weight. I don't want that either. So this is a toll on someone's body, like you said. After 5 years, how do we, the viewers, how do we, the people, push this forward? How do we make sure that our government, our voices are heard and push this forward?
Well, I think movements are important these days. From the Black Lives Matter movement to the Me Too movement. And there was a movement inside the professional wrestling industry just this spring called Speak Out. If you were a female wrestler and you had ever been victimized by a male wrestler or male wrestling wrestling promoter, there was hashtag Speak Out. And I think it's going to take a movement. I think it's going to take a boycott of an already hurting WWE industry. Their stock's down about 60% right now. Viewership is at, you know, all-time lows. And I think that's the time that a movement needs to arise. And I don't know whether Zelina Vega is the Norma Ray of that movement, or it's someone else who is higher up who says, look, we must as an industry do better, or it's someone like Tony Khan, who's worth $7 billion and owns a football club and a United States NFL football franchise, who says, look, we're going to do the right thing because it's the right thing to do. I don't know how that movement got started. I don't know if it's just fan-based or what exactly, but that's what needs to happen here. And wrestling fans, for once, have to stick to their guns.
Yeah.
And I think wrestling fans have to say, look, it's more important to me to cancel my WWE Network subscription and to not watch their pay-per-views and to not watch their merch or not purchase their merch until my voice and our voices are heard.
No, that's a great idea. But here's my problem, Steve. Too many of us in regular society, just the working Joes and Janes who buy their merchandise, who subscribe to their networks and consume the product, are stuck with being independent, misclassified as independent contractors themselves. So for me, the movement is not just how do we get WWE to classify their workers properly, but how do we get as a society the idea of workers should be classified properly as employees and given health care and retirement security and workers' comp and unemployment security and all of the things that come along with that. I mean, so for me, I'm with you 100%. I'm boycotting the WWE myself. But the bigger picture is, as a society, how do we find that solidarity of ending this misclassification of independent contractor status?
This is a 40-year problem, and the problem originated in 1980 when Ronald Reagan got everyday Americans to believe in the crap which is trickle-down economics. And that is that if a big corporation is doing well, that you either are or will be doing well. So we now have about a generation and a half of people in America, working Americans, who believe the lie of trickle-down economics. And it's going to take a massive one of two things. It's either going to take a massive education of those workers to realize, hey, I work for Amazon, and Bezos didn't pay any taxes last year, or Amazon didn't pay any taxes last year, or whatever else it is. They ought to be sharing in some of that $11 billion of profit. I work 60 hours a week like a dog in a warehouse or driving a truck or what have you. It's either going to take pain on that worker's part to the point where they say no more of this, or a massive education program, or both. And that's the only thing that I can say. That's the only way that I see this going, is that workers are going to have to get so tired of it and then stand in solidarity.
Yep.
If you work in crappy conditions and you feel like, that the company that you work for is getting over on you, man, it is so hard, the attempts to unionize the Walmart or the Lowe's or the whatever, and all the laws that are passed, right to work laws, which, can you believe in the state of West Virginia? We became a right-to-work state about 3 years ago. It was just unbelievable.
I know. But here's the thing. Here's the thing, Steve. You brought up a moment ago. You brought up Blair Mountain, and I know we were going to end this a second ago, but you've now hit a nerve with me, and I got to take this another couple of minutes. We did a labor history tour back in 2013, and we actually drove right through Mingo County and to the site of Blair Mountain, where at the time they were trying to do mountaintop removal on it. And we went to where the what was left of a town where you had 10,000 striking miners, where 1 million shots were fired, and a historic labor war that nobody knows anything about, where they systematically dismantled this entire town. And the only thing that's really left there is the platform from the train station. But as we pulled into this little town and what was left of the little gas station, out of nowhere came probably like 35 to 40 people with their Friends of Coal t-shirts and their belt buckles and their big hats, and of course their sidearms, wanting to know what an RV and a van from out of state were doing in that area. And here were people who at the time were getting screwed over by Patriot Coal and Magnum Coal and all the rest of them. They're defending the coal industry.
Right.
They've easily corporate America's figured out, as Jay Gould has said, I can easily pay half the working class to murder the other half. They've figured out how to divide us, and we've got to figure out how to undivide us.
Yes. And a lot of that problem came about in the 70s, 80s, into the 90s, and some extent when, the UMWA, for instance, down here in West Virginia, fought older miners for their benefits, which they shouldn't have done. They weren't educating their younger coal miners about the benefits, and those younger miners just think, hey, those safety laws that we have, and those great wages, they think they got that on their own or by their own merit. They don't realize that their grandfathers and their great-grandfathers paid blood prices so that they could work in safe mining conditions today. Their grandfathers and great-grandfathers in blood for them to not be paid in scrip anymore and to be able to earn a decent wage. And all of that's just forgotten.
Yeah, and again, I've been telling my union friends, you've got to do a massive education program. And I've had some listeners say, hey, how come other states don't have what Wisconsin has? Because Wisconsin actually teaches some bit of labor history as part of their school curriculum. But it's incumbent on us to make sure that we get this out here. But Steve, I appreciate the time. I'd love to have you come back and talk with us as this continues down the road.
Absolutely. And I'll stay in touch with you. Thank you so much for what you do to try to get this voice out there. I love hearing programs like yours, and we'll be in touch real soon. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Steve. I appreciate it. Steve New, attorney. Look, at the end of the day, we've got to make sure that no worker gets screwed over. Even someone who, like the WWE folks. I'm sure Zelina it will do just fine. But what about all of the hundreds of other ones who don't reach that status? Just my thought. I'd love to hear yours, though. Do you think we should be unionizing the WWE? Do you think you should be changing the independent contractor rules? You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Quick break. Right back.
Humanitarian disaster with the arrival of powerful Hurricane Iota. Iota rapidly intensified to a Category 5, the most powerful hurricane in the 2020 season, before hitting Nicaragua as a Category 4, striking nearly the exact same spot that Category 4 Hurricane Eta hit 2 weeks ago in one of the poorest regions of Nicaragua and Honduras.
Hurricane Iota. Now, that said, it hit Nicaragua in the same place that Eta did. Does that mean it will also hit Florida in the same place that Eta later did twice?
No, it is on track to cut a swath across Central America, heading west. Fueled by extremely warm ocean waters, Iota is a record breaker. It is the first ever 30th named storm since record keeping began in 1850. The average in a year is 12. It is the latest Category 5 ever recorded in a season, and only the second time in 170 years that we've seen a Category 5 in the month of November. Also, for the first time ever, we have had a Category 5 hurricane in the Atlantic for 5 straight years in a row.
Iota. But does this mean this is the end of hurricane season?
Hell no. Hurricane season officially ends November 30th, and the next storm, Kappa, may already be forming.
Wow.
A new study finds that man-made climate change is pushing hurricanes further inland than ever before. The researchers found that as ocean temperatures have increased in response to human-caused global warming, hurricanes are staying stronger, longer, even over land. In the late 1960s, a hurricane lost 75% of its intensity in the first day after landfall, but now storm intensity decays by less than half. A different study predicts that due to man-made climate change, massive so-called 100-year storms could occur 3 times as often in the United States and be 20% more severe. The UCLA researchers project that if governments fail to cut rates of greenhouse gas emissions, catastrophic megastorms and floods that before would hit just once a century will likely occur nearly every decade.
But still no Sharknadoes, right? That's totally fake.
Yeah, that's totally fake.
Okay, good.
But President-elect Joe Biden on Monday said upgrading our infrastructure to withstand accelerating climate impacts is a key component of his economic recovery. In a press conference after meeting with U.S. business and labor leaders, Biden said he was encouraged that they agreed with the necessity of ending the pandemic and rebuilding the economy.
We talked about climate a lot. We can also modernize infrastructure, roads, bridges, ports, building more climate-resilient cities and towns. These are the kinds of investments that are going to strengthen our economy and our competitiveness, create millions of jobs, union jobs.
However, in a late push to lock in drilling before the Biden administration takes over, the Trump administration on Monday said it will begin selling off leases to oil companies to drill in the Alaska National Wildlife Refuge, or ANWR, over the strong objections of Native American tribes living there. The Trump administration will let the companies pick their own spots. Lease sales are difficult but not impossible to reverse, and that would likely spark court battles. Environmental law group Earth Justice warns that oil companies could, quote, argue they deserve financial compensation if a Biden administration invalidates the leases. So those oil companies could profit either way from the last-minute sale.
Fine, pay them to go away. We've got too much damn oil anyway. They don't need it. Just make them go away.
But finally, some good news. The president of Shell Oil's U.S. division says the company will push the incoming Biden administration to reverse Trump's rollback of methane emissions rules and introduce carbon pricing, saying Trump's regulatory rollbacks haven't actually benefited the oil industry and that a price on carbon would help spur innovation.
That's Shell Oil saying that?
Yeah.
Wow. For much more on all of these surprising stories and the ones we couldn't get to today, check out our website at greennews.bradblog.com. I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
And this has been your Green News Report.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So 193,000 new cases of the virus on Saturday, 181,000 on Sunday, 166,000 yesterday. I'm waiting for the numbers for today. Not good. Not going in the right direction. And in fact, we were told after the election it was a big hoax. We'd never hear about it again. I do find it interesting that Rand Paul, who I guess he's a doctor, right? I guess he's ophthalmologist, right? Eye doctor. He came out with some interesting tweets today that I most certainly wanted to spend some time talking about, because he's got this idea that we need to treat coronavirus like we did with the mumps and the measles. He tweeted out, "Why does the left accept immune theory when it comes to vaccines, but not when discussing naturally acquired immunity?" I'm here to share some thoughts on, answering that question and all of the others that I've got around today's news. I've asked our good friend Dr. Kelly Sennholz to come talk with us. She is our resident expert on all things medical. Dr. Sennholz, thanks for taking time for us.
You're very welcome.
So why is it that we accept, like Rand Paul said, why do we accept immune theory with vaccines, but not naturally acquired immunity?
So if you let the virus go wild and just take over, not everybody would get it, but about half of the people would get it. And when you multiply out the 1% that would die, and keep in mind, if you overrun your hospitals, the number of deaths goes up. So it could be 3% or 5% would die. But that's not even the worst part. About 10% of people who get sick with COVID end up with long-term problems. And right now in the medical journals, they're estimating about 5% of those are going to be severe long-term issues. It's a topic not a lot of people are talking about right now, but it is going to blow a hole in our healthcare budget. But also, economists look at, if you have a mass killing, let's say, okay, we're okay with 25 million people dying, and we decide as a country that's what we're going to do. That will blow a hole in our economy, because I'll give you just one example. Right now, in I believe it was North Dakota, 1 out of every 1,000 residents is dead. And this impacts every part of the economy. I mean, think about it. It's kind of morbid to think about, but a lot of those people were living alone now. There's a bunch of houses on the market, nobody to buy them. It ripples through the economy like crazy. So, no, that is a crazy idea. He's absolutely insane.
But isn't this what the right wing's been pushing pretty much from the beginning? That it's like when I was a kid, mom would take us, someone's got mumps or measles or any chicken pox or any of that stuff, because I didn't get the vaccines. I actually got the stuff. So they're playing on that mentality that my generation was probably the last generation that happened to. But we're still young enough to remember that, yeah, we did that. We turned out okay.
Well, chicken pox in general does not cause long-term disability. In most of those diseases, with the exception of polio and measles, but most of the childhood diseases that we got, you get sick and then you get better. A 5 to 10% disability rate. Okay, I'll give you a number. So we have about 750,000 people in the United States that are disabled with end-stage renal disease. This is a huge budgetary item in our healthcare budget.
Right.
With 750,000. So if we allowed this to happen, we're talking about 5 million people disabled with things like pulmonary fibrosis, lung transplant, renal disease. It's very frustrating when you start talking about these numbers. People that follow Trump just glaze over; they can't hear it.
No, but what they'll say, Dr. Setholz, is that's why we need to get rid of the ACA and make them responsible for their own health care. They shouldn't have got sick in the first place.
I was talking with an author this evening who's written about the rural white male and what this whole thing is about. And they really, he's done stats. They're getting killed with this, from suicide, from gun deaths to lack of ACA, bankruptcies, you name it. Their anger is turning in on them. It's really hurting them, and it's kind of dragging the whole country down with them.
Yeah, I mean, I happen to be a rural white guy, so I'm kind of not thrilled about hearing what you're saying here, Dr. Setholz.
Well, we're talking about, for instance, the states that refused the Medicaid.
Right.
Those people are suffering. I mean, they can't get medical care. The doctors can't get paid. They can't get hospitalizations. If they do get hospitalized, they lose their home and everything they own. I mean, they're putting themselves through amazing amount of trauma for the purpose of maintaining white supremacy, I believe is what his analysis was.
Yeah, but is it white supremacy, or is it the idea that look, I'm a 53-year-old white guy. My whole life I've been told you stand up, you fight for yourself, you don't show emotion, you don't get any of that stuff. You work hard, you play by the rules, you're going to get ahead. But none of that PC kind of stuff. Be a man. I still go back to my mother, the spankings I got, and I only got 5 of them, and by today's standards would be full on child abuse, but I deserved them. But not allowed to cry. You don't, that's how men were raised during my era. And now you're saying we're going to change all that.
But I don't think that's it. I think that gets mixed up with it. And it's part of it in the sense that they have this deep abiding feeling for the past, like how it was. I understood the rules. I did my part. I was a man. I didn't cry. I went to work. I did all the things I was supposed to do.
Right.
And now you're telling me it's not enough?
Right. No, and I've said this 1,000 times. I grew up believing that if you worked hard, you played by the rules, you got ahead. And that is now broken. So I'm right there with you.
It's broken, baby. It's broken. But the thing is, how we fix it is we work together. With the citizens working together, we can get anything we want. But when they split us, we can't have anything.
Yeah, no, I agree with you, but here's the response that I then get, because we're heading back towards a shutdown, we're heading back towards mask mandates and all of these other things, and it's just because you hate Thanksgiving.
Yep.
That's what I'm being told. It's because you hate Thanksgiving and you don't want people to have Thanksgiving.
Yep. That's right. And that's exactly right. I had the longest conversation today with a guy, and he's well educated. He owns an investment company. Like, he's not an idiot. And he was telling me how he thinks he gets great joy out of riding on planes, and he knows the rules. Like, if you're eating, you don't have to wear a mask. So he just gets a bag of peanuts, and he just eats them really slowly during the entire flight, so he doesn't have to wear a mask. And, you know, it like, he feels like he's pulling one over on the man. And I'm like, you see, that's the thinking we're talking about. He doesn't want to be told what to do.
Yeah.
Women, black men, brown people, we've all been told what to do all our lives, and we learn how to function within society. We learn how to, you know, how to get what we need, but also make sure everybody else gets what they need too. And white men, because they haven't had to do that, are lacking in some basic skills. Like, it did not occur to him that he could kill somebody. It never occurred to him. He was worried about himself.
Yeah, or kill himself. I mean, so ultimately he wasn't really he didn't care about himself either.
He didn't.
So if he doesn't care about himself, what do you think he cares about you?
I think, you know, okay, that was the point of this guy's book, is that the whole thing is like the one thing they care about. This is why they laugh. You'll see them, you'll go, well, what about this statistic? And they'll laugh. And you're like, I don't get what you're laughing about. And what it is, they're laughing like the one thing that trumps everything. It's above everything. Is white male supremacy. As long as that remains intact, they feel that the rest of it will all fall in place, that it'll be fine.
All right.
And that's really what if you dig down to a whole, and it's white male supremacy, it's not women, although their women will follow them, they want to retain that. That's what they see as the key.
All right, no, it's not that I disagree. I'm letting it process, letting it just roll around in there for a minute.
No, I know what you're saying though. Like, and then on the other hand, I have this love for these guys. I grew up with these guys. I played with them on the playground. We did adventures together. We had all kinds of, we lived life together. So I get it. Like, I like them. Or who they used to be. But they've been hooked. This is the problem. They've been hooked. You haven't been hooked. There's something in your personality that caused you to not get hooked. You understand them. You get it. You are one of them, but you weren't hooked with that. And see, there's something in a personality type that allows them to be hooked. Plus, and I've talked about this before, people don't want to understand that this is happening, but they literally have data points on you. And they can tell if you're a person that is going to get hooked. And if you are that kind of person, they feed you the propaganda through Facebook. They know exactly how to find you. They know who you are. And so all these people that had whatever that personality trait is that can hook them, they knew who they were and they went after them. That's exactly what has happened. We're literally in a cyber war that nobody wants to talk about.
No, you're absolutely right. They do know what buttons to push.
You didn't get hooked because there's something about your personality, like you have a decency that doesn't allow you to think those thoughts. It wouldn't be something you would think, and so you wouldn't be hooked.
Or I just don't engage in social media as much as most people. I don't use Facebook at all. I don't use Facebook at all.
You don't?
Because look, it's a waste of time in my view. I mean, I'm not somebody who wants only one point of view, and maybe because I do this and I want multiple points of view, maybe that's helpful as well. I don't think I'm any more special than anyone else. I think it's all in how you allow yourself to be put.
And I don't think it's not about being special though. It's even about, like, how some people are shy and some people are outgoing and some people are this or that. and you're literally born with it. When you start to engage with a baby, you can tell what kind of personality they have, and it will follow them through their life. This is the genetic part of their personality. I think we're talking about that. Maybe
Okay.
combined with some.
No. It's an interesting theory, and I'd love to read more about it. The last question I wanted to ask you about, because the big news is, and this is where I fear a lot of people are thinking this whole thing is over, is we now have, I guess, some vaccines. Pfizer's claiming theirs is 90% effective. This Moderna is claiming 94.5% effective. According to Rand Paul, naturally acquired COVID-19 is 99.9982%
Oh, my God.
effective.
He
Just
is
to throw
so
that out
dangerous.
there. So it seems to me like he's saying, don't get the vaccine, just get sick. Or am I reading that
Yes.
wrong?
I will tell you that in dealing with rural, again, I worked in some very rural, very poor communities the last 10 years of my career, and there's a pride in overcoming the elements, is maybe the way I would say it. This is a big part of the personality structure that I'm talking about.
No, yep.
They would talk about like, oh, there was a baby deer laying out there. Oh, like city people would go, oh, let's go get him and take him down. No.
No, let's just
they
shoot him in the
to
head.
Die.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it's nature. The mother's gone. It's over. Just give it up. And
Look,
so
I see the
it's
same thing
okay.
when you hurt yourself or something like that. Bragging about scars or whatever. Yeah, I get that.
I like that part of rural folks. I like the idea that people are tougher or more resilient, or what's that word people are using? More able to deal with the blows of life and shake it off and move on. Not so fragile.
Right.
I like that part of it, but it's
Rugged.
almost to a pathology when you think I want to infect half the world and kill 25 million people just to prove we're better than the virus. Like, that's just crazy.
That's just crazy. Just crazy. But Dr. Sennholz, I appreciate the time and the information. Thanks so much as always.
Have a wonderful evening.
You as well, our good friend Dr. Kelly Sennholz. I'd love to hear your thoughts. You doing anything for Thanksgiving? Or are you gonna hole up all by yourself and let the virus win? Rick at thericksmithshow.com. Quick break. Right back. Stick around.
Saving work in America, one show at a time. The Rick Smith Show.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1747. That was the day that a crowd of Boston workers took British officers as hostages and held them for 3 days. The workers were outraged that fellow Bostonians had been pressed into service on British Navy ships against their will. Impressing ship crews was one of the ways the British manned their ships when there were not enough willing crew members. The seaport at Boston had become so notorious for this kind of worker kidnapping that other merchant vessels had begun to avoid the area for fear that their crews might be taken by the British Navy. Bostonians became increasingly vocal against the practice and worried about its impact on the local economy. In 1745, the local selectmen petitioned for, quote, immediate relief from impressment. They wrote that it was a matter that, quote, nearly affects the liberties of the people and is a great insult upon this government. 2 years later, Commodore Charles Knowles sailed into Boston on his way to the West Indies. While he resupplied and refit his ships, some of his crew members escaped from service. To make up his diminished crew, on November 16th, Knowles ordered local workers to be rounded up as replacements. Fed up, Bostonians detained members of the British fleet, including one of Knowles' lieutenants. The Massachusetts governor, William Shirley, was able to persuade persuade Knowles not to retaliate. He helped to facilitate an exchange, the impressed Bostonians for the British hostages. That January, a young Samuel Adams founded the newspaper The Independent Advertiser, published to defend the rights and liberties of mankind. The paper commended the mob for standing up to impressment. Samuel Adams would go on to become a leader in the American Revolution. Like what you hear? Check out more at laborhistoryin2.com.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So, interesting story coming out of New York. Evidently a rapper, and I'm not going to get into this, Dupree, I guess. Dupree G.O.D. Evidently he jumped up on a city bus occupied with about 20 people, 25 people, and I guess decided he thought it was going to be a great idea to shoot a flamethrower from the top of the occupied city bus in what they're saying was an unsanctioned stunt. Evidently, he was shooting himself a rap video. Probably didn't realize you need to get a permit or any of that stuff, or let the people on the bus know that you're going to be firing off a flamethrower. Evidently, he recorded the shooting of the flamethrower with a drone, and he did so because it was a video tribute to Wu-Tang Clan. Which I think I've heard some of their stuff in the past, but evidently they're a big New York City hip hop group, and he thought this was a great tribute. Got himself into a little trouble. The transit agency spokesperson said it was absurd, dangerous, and just plain stupid. And it's one of those things where you go, the police department's investigating it. What do you need to investigate with someone shooting off a flamethrower in the middle of the city on top of a crowded bus? But we don't need gun control. No. Oh, no, he said that word. Oh, God, coming for the guns. No, does everyone need a flamethrower? I mean, I've often joked, in the wintertime when I don't want to shovel, that a flamethrower would be helpful. You could just just melt all the snow. But are you okay with a guy on a city bus having the flamethrower? No, I am clearly not. Also, on the COVID front, just kind of throwing it out here, and kind of bad news. I'm wishing Chuck Grassley the best. I'm not a big Chuck Grassley fan, but the 87-year-old second oldest member of Congress, second oldest member of the Senate, evidently he has tested positive for the coronavirus, saying that this morning I learned that I have been exposed to the coronavirus. I received a COVID-19 test and immediately began to quarantine. He claims he still feels fine. Test came back positive for the coronavirus. I am continuing to follow my doctor's orders on the CDC guidelines. Now, this is a guy who I don't think he's missed a vote in 27 years. If he misses a vote, and probably not, there's probably not going to be another vote before the end of his career here. But if he does miss a vote, I think you're going to know that he's not fine. 87 years old. But I wish him best. I do. I want no ill for Mr. Grassley or anyone. Anyway, if you missed any of today's program, thericksmithshow.com. That's where you go to get the podcast. The Rick Smith Show app on the smartphone. Take the program on the go wherever you go. And as always, you can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Thanks so much for being here. We'll see you back here next time.